Hi everyone, and welcome to Moxxie Life Coaching. I'm Michelle, and I'll be your host as we explore what life coaching is and how it can empower you to create and live your best life. We'll talk about topics ranging from our own self-defeating behaviors to getting to know our authentic selves. Together, we'll investigate a variety of self-coaching modalities and explore a wide range of topics relevant to getting the most out of the life that you are actively creating. New episodes will drop every Tuesday, so please subscribe so you don't miss out on the great hints, tips, and tricks, and generally awesome content that will help you create your best life. So welcome, and thank you for listening. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Moxxie Coaching Podcast. I'm almost as excited today about today's episode as I was about the episode on self-coaching. This is, I hope, going to be a light bulb for a lot of you. It certainly was for me. I stumbled on the concept of something called the highly sensitive person. I don't know, a couple months ago. And it resonated with me like crazy. When I started reading about what highly sensitive people are, I couldn't believe it. I could have sworn that this book was written just for me. And if you're the type of person who's been told forever that you are too sensitive, if you're the type of person who can pick out subtleties that other people just don't or can't seem to pick out, you may be a highly sensitive person. If you are more intuitive than your friends and family, you may find that you're a highly sensitive person. So what I'm going to do in this episode is share with you some introductory material about what exactly a highly sensitive person is. We'll talk first about the brilliant woman who discovered this trait, and we'll talk about some of the ways to cope with being a highly sensitive person, and also some of the gifts of being highly sensitive, because my entire life, I will tell you that I have always thought it was a little bit of a curse. Excuse me. I've always thought it was a little bit of a curse, and I'm starting to reframe that. I'm starting to reframe that high sensitivity as a gift, and I'm hoping that this podcast will help you do the same. All right, so let's dig in. As I said in the intro, I stumbled across this book a while back, and at first I thought, oh, this is fantastic. And then my little voice said, hey, wait a second, this almost sounds too good to be true. Maybe this was just some sort of temporary pop psychology phenomenon that came about in the 90s and has completely disappeared or has been completely debunked. And I was really pleased to discover that that's not the case. In fact, the research into this topic continued, and the book that I read that was originally published in the 90s was updated and republished again late 2019, I think, somewhere in there. So the science behind it has not been debunked, and I have to tell you, I was really excited about that because the concept of the highly sensitive person put so much of how I have interacted with the world into perspective for me. And I am hoping that this episode of the podcast will do the same for you. The author of the book is Elaine Aron. She's a Ph.D. and she is married to a researcher. So between the two of them, once she came up with this theory, essentially, about highly sensitive people, they began to do their own research. And they have found that this truly is a new human trait that had not previously been identified by psychology, even though psychology has been around for 100 years. And the theory about why it hadn't been discovered before is essentially that it's not a new trait, but it's not a new trait, but because people who display the trait, because people who are highly sensitive have a tendency to hold back, to be what would normally be considered more shy or more introverted, that's really how the highly sensitive person was attributed. They were basically just labeled as, oh, they're shy or they're introverted. There's something not quite like the rest of us about them. And they're finding that HSPs, highly sensitive people, are extremely responsive to their environment. And they're almost chameleon-like in that they can essentially fit in any setting. And so the HSP's innate intuition, intuition to work around their quote unquote challenges is what prevented them from being recognized for all of those years. You know, they did their thing, they would accommodate, they would react, they would work around and within the system, and due to that, they were looked over. And it took an HSP, Dr. Elaine, to recognize this and to say, oh, wow, okay. And what she decided after she did all of this work is that she should bring this information out to the public. Because as the person who quote unquote discovered it, number one, of course, she's going to get some accolades for it. But also because she's looking at it from the perspective of what a service this information can provide to people. So my hope is that in listening to this podcast, which is a very basic introduction to a vast body of work, you'll find that, yeah, maybe it does resonate with you, and maybe the concept is worthy of some further research on your part. But I just wanted to present it to everyone out there in hopes that even if it just reaches one other HSP who didn't know they were an HSP, who thought maybe they were weird or broken, yeah, you're not. How cool. Okay. Accolades for it. But also because she's looking at it from the perspective of what a service this information can provide to people. So my hope is that in listening to this podcast, which is a very basic introduction to a vast body of work, you'll find that, yeah, maybe it does resonate with you, and maybe the concept is worthy of some further research on your part. But I just wanted to present it to everyone out there in hopes that even if it just reaches one other HSP who didn't know they were an HSP, who thought maybe they were weird or broken, yeah, you're not. How cool. The new edition of the book uh, has updated research and supplemental research to the original book. So if it's something that you are interested in, you're interested in looking at the science behind it, I would recommend just going ahead and picking up the newest version of the book. It's available on Amazon and I'm sure everywhere else. She also updated a section on medications, and there was some conversation around how some HSPs can have a tendency toward more depression or more anxiety due to their high sensitivity. And essentially, she just said, I'm bowing out of this conversation. I'm not an expert, and I'm going to leave that conversation to the experts. So, in my mind, that actually really made me feel like she was in integrity in terms of, hey, I don't know this and I'm not going to pretend to be an expert. So, from that perspective, I feel that the information in this book is even more valuable because she doesn't have any problem saying, hey, this isn't my area of expertise, but this is, so listen up. I think the most valuable thing that came out of the new edition, especially for the purposes of this conversation, is a new way of describing the trait of high sensitivity. And it's an acronym, and the acronym is the word DOES. DOES stands for D, depth of processing. HSPs have a tendency to process stimulus more deeply. O is for overstimulation, because HSPs have a tendency to become more easily overstimulated than others. E is for emotional reactivity. HSPs have a tendency to be more emotionally reactive, better or worse. They're happier and they're sadder, depending on where they are on the spectrum of emotion that day. And then the last is S, which is sensing the subtle. So we're going to go through each of those in depth, and I will give you some examples from my own life as we are talking about this. And then I'm going to point you to a quiz on the Moxxie Coaching website that you can take that will help you determine whether or not you are a highly sensitive person. And before we get started, I want to just add a little caveat here. As a highly sensitive person myself, I have always felt like I was a little bit neurotic. And I have definitely behaved as an introvert. And of course, I don't think anyone wants to be neurotic. So that was a negative in my mind. That was like, gosh, you're just so sensitive. You're so neurotic. Da, 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 da. So I just want to put that out there that, if you're listening to this and if you have been beating up on yourself the same way, know that it's not neuroses. It's not a negative. It's a positive in most situations, and it is something that, because of the gift has to be managed and appreciated and worked with. So it's not it's like being I would imagine, I can't say for sure, it's like being a genius. There comes some responsibility and some things that you have to do as a genius uh, to function in normal society. At least the few people that I know that are geniuses, um, they do. They struggle. They need to sometimes bring themselves down to everyone else's cognitive level so they're able to communicate and be in society. And that's kind of the same for an HSP, except we're bringing ourselves down temporarily to the more common or standard emotional levels so we can fit in and so we can um, work within the constraints of what society offers to us. We don't really have it. Well, we do have a choice. Um, but those of us who want to take our high sensitivity and take it to the next level, we don't really have a choice. We work with it, we manage it, and we cultivate the gifts that are present within. All right, let's get started. So, depth of processing. Depth of processing is difficult to observe, but it is key in identifying an HSP. As someone who processes deeply, basically what we do is we relate and we compare things to one another in a way that's different from non-HSPs. We tend to notice similar things. We tend to notice things that are different. We tend to notice subtleties that other people don't notice. And we take all of this information and we turn it around in our brains like a Rubik's Cube. And we look at all of the different angles and we consider it from the perspective of our past. And maybe we consider it from the perspective of our future. And it is awesome and it's overwhelming. So, for example, my husband and I could be out. We are taking a bike ride and we notice this really pretty little red balloon floating along up through the sky. The sky is deep blue. It's a beautiful day, all of those things. So we comment on it, and my husband notices, yeah, pretty little balloon. That's what he notices. I, on the other hand, notice, like I said, the depth of the color of the sky, the temperature, the wind velocity, the sounds going on around me, the smell from the lake that's nearby, the fresh, fishy, watery smell, all of those things. Um, Maybe even past memories of red balloons. Oh my gosh, I remember when I was 5 and I went to that birthday party and they had that weird game where everybody sits on balloons and tries to pop them with their butt. I don't know, but I remember that. So all of those things are flying around in my head subconsciously and consciously on, some of them, while I'm processing one little visual. And so that is depth of processing. Okay. It it can be a wonderful trait. I mean, if you want someone to give you um, intricate details of a memory or intricate details of something, talk to an HSP and they will share information with you that other people may not have even thought to recognize, or other people just. Another example of depth of processing is the distinction between how an HSP and a non HSP might learn something new. So, for example, my husband and I are both going to learn how to golf, let's just say. And he is all about just give me the clubs. Give me the clubs. Let's go, let's go, let's go. I want to hit the ball. I want to hit the ball. Let's do this. This will be fun. Not even thinking about anything really other than the fact that he wants somebody to give him the golf club and he wants to hit the ball. And he's happy to listen to the instructions and he'll even integrate the instructions, but he is certainly not going to live and die by those. And then there's me. Oh, well, I probably should watch a video about golfing first. And then I want to take a look at the clubs and I want to take a look at the balls and I want to take a look at all the different things that I'll need. And then I need to think about how the situation might go because I'm going to be standing there in public with a bunch of other people that I don't know, and I'm not going to be good at this. So how is that going to feel? Oh gosh, I hope it doesn't feel like it felt that other time when I didn't know what I was doing and I felt like a complete idiot. Just give me the stuff, give me my video, let me go over in the corner, watch my video, play with my toys, practice my thing a little bit, and then come back and I'll ask you some questions and then we can get into the details. That's a classic difference in how an HSP and a non-HSP would deal with learning something new. It takes a lot of energy to be an HSP. Sometimes it pays off because we can use the information that we gathered from our past experiences to save ourselves from making mistakes. So there is some merit in looking back, considering the options and making a decision. But it just takes a lot of energy. And I also want to point out, this is a bit of an aside, going back to talking about the DOES, the Ds. HSI, or as timid, or as antisocial, introverted, all of those things that in a society that values outgoing, bold, sometimes what an HSP would consider loud people and actions, we can be given those negatively toned monikers. How's that? Oh, don't be so shy, or, oh, you're being too sensitive, or, oh, you're you're this or that. We're not timid. We're not shy. We're thoughtful and we're intentional. So if you are a person who has been told your entire life that you are too shy and you're too sensitive, think again. You're probably just an HSP. The next letter in the acronym DOES is the letter O. And the letter O is about overstimulation. It's about noticing every little thing. It's about having too many things to remember. It's about feeling like there's too much noise and clutter and chaos. Something is too long. It's about everything being a two, right? A classic overstimulation situation for an HSP would be my first wedding. It was so overwhelming. I felt like everything was happening at once. There was too much noise. There was too much talk. There were too many people in my face. There were too many people I was supposed to be talking to and hugging and wait, smile over this way and smile over that way and do this and do that. And it went on for hours. And I don't think that I've ever been as exhausted as I was that night of my first wedding. And I know the weddings are exhausting for everyone, but for an HSP, between all of the chaos leading up to the wedding and the wedding itself, um, I was worn out. I mean, physically worn out, mentally worn out, emotionally worn out, all of those things because it's a, okay, let's look at it this way. It's the difference in feeling like you are floating along in a nice, calm stream and feeling like you are being tossed around without a life jacket in the rapids. That's kind of how an event like that can feel for an HSP. And that's why knowing that you have some HSP tendencies can be so valuable, because once you're aware, you can begin to make modifications that work for you without, turning into a big deal for everybody else. You just need to take your time. You need to do what you need to do for yourself, and everything will be just fine. Is probably the most challenging element for an HSP, but it's also the easiest to counteract. It's also the easiest to just, you take some time, you plan some time. In one of my earlier podcasts, I think it was called five ways to chill out, or five unusual ways to chill out, or something along those lines. And every single thing in that episode of the podcast would be an excellent tool for you as someone who is an HSP. Things that'll help ground you, like getting in the water, playing in the sand, being in nature. All of those things basically sort of suck that frenetic energy back out of you and leave you feeling more renewed and more whole again, more able to participate, more able to give, because a lot of HSPs are very, very empathic. They're very, very much a giving type of a person, but they have to be careful. We have to be careful not to put ourselves out there and to help others to the point where we're not taking care of ourselves. Now, I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or trained in counseling therapy. Uh, and when I started to read about this whole thing about overstimulation, my head went to, oh gosh, that sounds like I'm on the spectrum. I'm on the autism spectrum. And actually, I have on occasion briefly considered that about myself anyway. But this makes a whole lot more sense, because when you look at the difference in someone who is autistic and someone who is an HSP, an autistic person has a very, very difficult time noticing social cues, for example, because they are wired in a way that, like an HSP, they're noticing everything, but they're just more distracted by it. Where, they might be looking during a conversation with someone, they might be, rather than looking in that person in the face and uh, listening to what they're saying and absorbing what they're saying, they may be distracted by the light fixture. They might be distracted by the dog outside. They might be distracted by lint on the carpeting. Um, it is a different level of distraction. As an HSP, we are very, very aware of the subtleties. We're not so much distracted by things. We are hyper aware of the subtleties. So, for example, um, in that same conversation. An HSP is a lot more likely to notice something unique, a unique characteristic about the person's face that they're in conversation with, because they notice every little thing. And it could be, oh yeah, I met so and so. Yeah. There's the ones with that cute little mole on their cheek that other people might not ever even notice. So I can't honestly articulate a lot of information about the distinction between an HSP and someone who is autistic, but I will tell you that the book clearly states that they are two different things. And if you'd like to do more research, I would most definitely support you in that. And I would love to find out what you came up with. Emotional reactivity is the designation for the letter E in DOES. And I laughed because emotional reactivity is the one that actually triggered me a little bit emotionally, because I'm very sensitive to being told that I'm oversensitive, because I've been told I've been oversensitive my entire life. So I thought that was a little funny and a little ironic. Basically, what this means is we have a tendency to react more intensely to positive stimulation, positive experiences, negative stimulation, negative experiences, that kind of thing. And we have a tendency to be highly emotional, highly empathic, highly empathetic, and intuitive, and creative. So if you are a quote unquote temperamental artist, you might be an HSP. A lot of the stereotypes that are around these negative stereotypes that are around these traits are debunked in this book, and I just absolutely love that. This is true. I can resonate, or I do resonate with everything that I just said, and I will tell you that my husband and I have had conversations a number of times, and I will say to him, I wish I could just slough things off the way you do. I wish I could just not care the way you do. Or, why does this bother me so much more than it bothers you? And he recognized it years ago. And he certainly didn't, excuse me, he didn't call it, you're an HSP, you're blah, 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 blah. Basically, what he said is, you feel things more strongly than I. You feel good things more strongly, and you feel the tough things more strongly. And knowing that, learning that about myself, has actually helped our relationship, because I don't get so frustrated with him as I get wound up and say, why isn't it that you don't feel this way? Well, he doesn't feel that way because he's not wired to feel that way. And there's nothing wrong with that any more than there's something wrong with me being wired as a highly sensitive person. So take your high sensitivity and look at the positives. Cultivate those positives. Enjoy the fact that when somebody else just sees a balloon floating by, you experience the balloon floating by. How lucky are you? The last letter is S, for sensing the subtle. And people who are highly sensitive basically just bring in more sensory information, sift through that sensory information more thoroughly, process things more deeply, as we've talked about, than non-HSPs. So in that whole thing about sensing the subtle, there's a few things. Number one, we have a tendency to enjoy the small things, maybe more than non-HSPs. For example, one of my absolute favorite things in life, to the point where I've actually thought, I'm going to miss this when I'm not in physical form anymore, is laying outside under a tree, feeling the wind blow on me. Summer, quiet, mellow, soft breeze. That's one of the best things in the entire world as far as I'm concerned. And I think it's my HSP in me that allows me to fully embrace and revel in that kind of thing, that someone else would say, oh yeah, this is nice. Smells good. Yep. Okay, I'm going to go do something else now. It's just a different level of the same thing, right? It's a spectrum. HSPs also can be seen as, or can be thought of as, or maybe they are, more intuitive than non-HSPs. And as someone who considers herself very intuitive, and as someone who cultivates that intuition, I will say that I'm not 100% sure how the whole intuition thing ties in with HSPs, because it's certainly true that an HSP could be identified as someone with more intuition simply because they sense the subtle more than the other person. Real life example, I was in a meeting a few years ago. It was a business meeting, and we were just beginning a partnership with someone, and that person had arranged the meeting for us. He was late. We went in and started the meeting. He came in 10 minutes later, and I could tell immediately that he was pissed off. And no one else in the room got it. Particularly my business partner, who just completely oblivious to everything that's going on with this guy. And we walk back to, anyway, as a group, we walk back to a different space, and I could feel it. I mean, I could physically feel this guy's upset. And I finally just asked him. I'm like, look, we're establishing this relationship. This is a new business relationship. Something is going on here. What's going on? And then he says, well, I brought you into this situation. I felt like you went behind my back. I felt like you were undermining me, all of these things. And my business partner was flippin' clueless. So, and he's brilliant, or was brilliant. Well, he probably still is. But he is not particularly tuned in to the subtleties, let's just say. So that's an example. I mean, as an HSP, was that intuition? Was that empathic ability? Was it simply being highly sensitive? And I will say that I do think they are different, in that as someone who, like I said, considers myself intuitive, I get regular intuitive downloads that have nothing to do with my environment or my situation. So I do think, for those who are interested in metaphysics and those who are interested in psychology, that those two things are different, but I can see certainly how they would appear to be one and the same. Very, very basic introduction to the concept of the highly sensitive person. I hope that it gave you a little bit of insight into maybe someone you know or insight into yourself. If you are a non-HSP of an HSP child, please be aware that that child feels all the feels all the time and notices everything all the time. And be sensitive to that if you can. If you have an HSP spouse or partner, be aware. Hopefully, this information will help you identify some of their HSP traits and help you understand a little bit more about all of the great things about them, about why they remember your first date and the clothes you wore on your first date. Hint, hint, husband. Um, Enjoy that about them. Revel in that. Use them, right? Hey, do you remember this? What happened on this day and how did that go down? So, um, anyway, just an introduction to the HSP. I found it fascinating. I'm hoping you did too. I'm hoping you got something out of it. There is a free quiz on the Moxxie Coaching website. I will put a link in the show notes. And that quiz is designed to help you identify whether you're an HSP, or you can have someone else take the quiz and help identify. Maybe it's your child, or maybe it's a friend, something along those lines. So that is that for today. I thank you so much for listening. I greatly appreciate the time that you take to spend with me. And please don't hesitate to reach out. I am on all of the social media platforms, Instagram at Moxxie Coaching, at Moxxie Coaching. And I think that's it. So have a fantastic week and dig around in your brain, find out if you're an HSP, and if you are, give yourself a hug and be thankful. Take care.